You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. And our special guest for this episode is my friend, an amazing human, Stacy Crawford, who has a master's degree in education. She is a longtime practitioner of mind-body medicine. She's a Gallup certified strengths coach. She is a faculty member and mentor coach at Awaken. Stacy leads events, trainings, provides coaching services as well. And she's just an amazing, compassionate human in this world who, like so many of us, has been on her healing journey, coming into her power, stepping into really offering a lot of good things through the wisdom you have accumulated over the years and the gifts that you have. And I'm really happy to have you with us, Stacy, and I'm really happy to introduce you to our listeners. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Holy mackerel. No, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I'm just so honored to be here and to know you, Molly. You know that your work has been so important in my growing and my journey. Yes.
So amazing how we all get to support each other. We come into our power and we just get to boost up each other, each with our own respective gifts. Kind of amazing.
So true.
Well, there's many things we could talk about, especially considering that you live in Minnesota, which is the current area of focus right now for our country. But what you and I settled on talking about today involves a personal story that you and your family experienced that was a life-changing event. Happens to more people than we think. And I'd love to just dive right into that. Would you bring us into a January 5 years ago? And we'll start there.
Yes. Yes. I would be honored to do that. And the first thing I think before I even share my story is that this is, of course, my story, and it is one story. And I recognize that we are all, when I use the word growing, ing, it is currently happening, always happening. And each of us has probably a story like this or one that is similar that has really, when I have to say, when I was in my 20s, I did workshops for people who were court ordered, and I often talked about near death experiences. And I said to these young people, I never wish this upon you. And yet, when they happen, it is an opportunity. And I would give examples of that. And frankly, in our family, which by the way, we call the Wave Riders, we have many, many examples of personal resilience, again, as many families do. But this particular incident occurred, yes, back in, it's hard to believe that it's 5 years ago, but back on a cold January day, not quite as cold as it is here today. But my partner, Don, and I were driving home. And I should mention, I have two lovely children, Sydney, who is 28 and lives in downtown Minneapolis, and my son, Mason, who the story is about, who is now 22, who lives in the basement of our house and has his own place down there. And so my partner, Don, and I were driving home. We were, just to give you the visuals, in my mom's little black VW. I can just remember it as clear as day. And the phone call came over the system, and it was my son Mason's friend calling, and she was having a panic attack, and she was unable to speak. She was really almost unable to breathe. And I realized in that moment, knowing that my son has gone skiing, that something bad had really happened. And so, as a former first responder, I had had many opportunities to be on scene. And I would say that one of the most important things that I brought was to calm down, to slow down, to breathe, and to help patients do the same. But also for the firefighters that I worked with, how do we just slow down a little bit? So the first thing I did was pulled over and I asked the young person to breathe with me so we could get her breathing back to an acceptable pace.
So you could find out what's even
Yeah,
happening. Oh, yes. Oh, as a mom, you have to put your mom actually, for your mom heart to be able to hear what's happening, you've got to bring out your amazing first responder hat.
I know. It's so true. We have so many parts of us that luckily come into play in such times like this. So I was able to get her breathing to calm down. She was able to tell me that Mason had been injured. We really didn't know sort of the mechanism of injury. We didn't know really the details. And in that moment, what I just needed to know was that his heart rate and his breathing and, it wasn't bleeding out or anything, sort of the ABCs. And so I was able to talk to one of the paramedics on the hill and asked about his vitals and heard that he was stable with regard to that. And we really didn't know anything else. And so of course, I turned the car around and we headed back.
I can't
Don and I,
imagine
yep.
that drive back just on pins and needles, trying to just get there, like, get there.
Yes, and, what I can remember, and it's all so much of this is such a blur, but what I can remember is just really being intentional about breathing, really, working hard. Our nervous system does tell us for good reason that we may not be safe. And so we don't wanna extinguish that, and yet in this at the same time, we need I was driving and I'm thinking, "I need to get there,
You gotta
get
function.
there safely." Yep, so I do recall just really breathing very heavily, and I don't know if we really said much, and I think that part of what can be really hard in these times is that we start saying all these stories, "Oh, what if this? What if that?" And that then even further activates, and I try to stay away from doing that and just wait for the facts.
Your mind body practice came in it just you'd been practicing it so much that it really was second nature at that point, which is
It
kinda
was
cool.
absolutely second nature.
Wow.
And not only the mind body piece of it, but the mindfulness being that I don't need to attach to 37 stories about what I don't even know has happened. And so I think that that distance or disassociation in this moment, if you will, was really helpful. And so we arrived at the emergency room, and who knows how much time passed. We waited. We saw the ambulance come in. The ambulance was coming from a distance with him. And as is normal, we were not able to go in until they stabilized him in the room. And so who knows? I feel like it was hours, might have been. We're in that little room waiting, and I won't go into all the details there, but it was pretty scary and just trying to hold off worst thoughts, I guess. So we were able to go into the room, and I think part of I just won't ever forget, we had given Mason, I think that Christmas, a new down coat, and they had cut it off of him, which is what we as first responders do, which was, of course, fine. But what happened is that the room was filled with all this down everywhere. And so it was really surreal. I mean, it was everywhere. It was almost like clouds or fog. And I couldn't even figure out in the moment what that was.
Why is it
You
snowing
know
in
Yeah,
this
it was
room? Oh my goodness.
so we were able to see him, and my son Mason, if you choose to follow him, we'll give you those details later. He's actually quite an entertaining person even in those moments, and they had given him some pain medication. I think that we knew that his legs really hurt and his back hurt, and he was trying to tell us some things. We couldn't really make sense of it. And luckily, we did call a friend of ours who is an orthopedic surgeon, not a spinal surgeon, but he came, and that was really calming. And I have another dear friend who's a medical personnel and called her, and that was helpful just to know that we weren't alone here because we were both struggling. And The doctors tell you what's going on. We knew that he couldn't move his legs at that time and that he was having emergency surgery. So he did go on to, had the neck brace on, and they were bracing his back as well. And he did have the surgery that evening, I think starting around 8 o'clock. It's all really a blur. And then we learned that the outcome of that surgery had been very good. One thing, if anyone finds themselves, I just want to sort of forewarn here, one thing that we never know when someone is injured, even when it's a high C injury, we never know what the outcome will be until sometime later. And medically, it was always kind of a given to say, well, what you have in 6 months is what you have. And that's not really true. And most doctors who are working a lot with spinal cord injured people will tell you that they see improvements up to a year and even sometimes beyond. And some spinal cord injuries, they will report that they're still getting back some feeling, some sensation many years later. And so I follow a lot of different groups on social media, and I find that really helpful. So as I've watched a number of families go through this process after us, many of them have not immediately said he's paralyzed. They just haven't even told that story. And I really admire that. I think that's a really wise way of going. The body is miraculous. We don't know how it's going to heal. So,
But
uh,
that's not what happened with you guys.
right, right. Yeah, we believed in that. And that's the other part of the story that we probably won't have time for today. Mason spent following all of his rehab. He spent about a year, and he has a lot of videos telling about this, really trying to walk functionally. We call it now, we're very specific, functionally, so that he could move throughout his day without mobility devices, and eventually decided that that wasn't for him, wasn't to be doing any longer, and that he actually needed to get out and love life and experience things. So
Wow.
let me back up again, though. So we get through the surgery, and the next day, we are already making plans about what should happen. Of course, this was in COVID, during COVID. I had purchased ski passes for all of our family because it was a COVID thing we could do. So I still recognize within me that I carry some of that survivor guilt, if you will, or, I by and large, I know that that wouldn't have changed anything, and yet
It's just what the brain does, right? What if I hadn't done this? What if I how can I take
Yes.
responsibility for this somehow? There's 8 million different things that happen, but we cling to the one thing that we know could have done differently, even though
Right.
it's just
It is what it
this
is.
is what it
It
is. It
is what
really is.
happened. Yep,
Mhm.
and how we move forward is what's really important. So,
Yeah.
I just remember Mason waking up that next day after surgery, and he he just said, "Mom, here's the deal. You need to start a GoFundMe. People are already asking how they can help, and this is gonna be expensive." He had probably searched that the average cost for someone with, lower level spinal cord injury is about $500,000 the first year, and it's very expensive year after year. For those with higher C-level injuries, it's about $1,000,000 expenditure.
Holy smokes. But just says so much about this guy is 17 years old,
Yep.
and he's just thinking like this. Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
he has been extraordinary throughout the whole thing. It's really been something, and so the second thing he said is that we need to find the best rehab hospital there is. And my dear friend who's working in the medical field, we started researching right away, and the first thing that rose to the top was Craig Hospital in Englewood, Colorado, and partly because of my science research background in mind body medicine, I know that the outcome of any person navigating any disease or illness or injury is always greater in community. So people with breast cancer live longer when they have a community.
That makes sense, but I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So I remember thinking at the time and talking to Mason about it. They have a young person program. They work with adolescents. They have about 10 or 15, maybe even 20 adolescents in the unit right now. And because it was COVID, his friends couldn't come in and we were limited to visiting him. And so we were taking shifts, and our daughter Sydney came and gave us some relief time and spent some special time with him. And so, about, I think, 9 days later, Mason and I shipped out via medical jet to Denver and arrived at Craig Hospital, to what feels, we often call it the Harvard of spinal cord injury facilities. And we were greeted in such a way that, I mean, you're thinking, all right, wait, my son has a broken back. Here he is. He had been very sad to leave the good care of the nurses here in our home city, Duluth, Minnesota. And we arrived there and he was lit up. The people approached him with such positivity and a different kind of energy that I think immediately just really communicated there's a lot of hope and a lot of possibility here.
As a mom, that had to be, I mean, you'd wanna move heaven and earth to have that happen. If this
Yes.
must happen to my child, then let something like this be where they receive care, if at all humanly possible. And so unfortunate that it's not really possible for a whole lot of folks. So cool though that places, I love that they get a shout out in this episode because it's so cool that places like that exist. Like if we compassionate folks could design the world, that's how we'd want to design something like a specialty place like that, and how amazing they're out there. They're doing it.
Right. And I think what's also important about it is the structure of it. They actually design a network of people around the patient. So everybody has a social worker, and that social worker navigates all the insurance, which, when you're in this chronic grief state, it is hard to even figure out where the pineapple is in the grocery store, let alone figure out what they're saying to you over the phone about the insurance coverage. And so we had a therapist, we had an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, I think about 10 different people that surrounded us, including nutritionists and so many people that were there to, and then of course the people that work in the recreational therapy area, they were on our team as well. And so we just felt immediately, I would just say, held in this new community. And there were so many people that reached out that had been a part of that community that, years prior had been there to Craig Hospital, who just held us in that place and said, this is a great place. We're so sorry you're a part of the family, but know that you are in a family and you are surrounded with love and support. So,
That's so cool.
yeah, so, I just will say Mason worked tremendously hard there in both inpatient, and we lived in a apartment down the way, and again, one person at a time. So we did shift change all the time, and our daughter would come when she could. And then we did return there for outpatient therapy, and then a couple of times after that for more outpatient therapy, because they have state of the art equipment and the people working there are just so darn knowledgeable. So we spent really the whole year, I would say, going back and forth to Denver was our second home. And then, there came a time when Mason returned home, and that was challenging. We had modified our home quite a lot. The first thing I wanted for him to happen was that he would be able to get into the house by a ramp and that he could use his bathroom. And that there was another angel who helped us with that. But we did all those home repairs, renovations,
Like
and
things you don't think about until you need to think about them, and then you realize how woefully inadequate almost everything it can be.
well, and like you said earlier, we recognize that we have a great deal of privilege. We have two parents. We have higher education degrees. We were able, my partner Don stepped away. He's a scientist at the university. He stepped away for a full semester, and the two of us became quite a team. Not to say there wasn't conflict occasionally, because these things are very, very hard. So it's not surprising that there are greater challenges on this pathway.
High stress situation all the way around. Even while there's so much joy, happiness, "Okay, this is working right. Alright, this is going well." But Hard to relax.
Yes, it's really that both and situation. Your central nervous system is activated, and yet you feel loved and held, which is part of building safety back, right? And that was a part for Mason. We could have a whole 3-hour podcast about how his legs react to his body. They are an outward sense of his central nervous system now. And so, he was recalibrating his whole nervous system, I think still is.
Oh.
Really amazing to see.
That's what I meant when I said earlier that's not how it happened for you guys. I meant because when I remember hearing a bit about this before, and you said that probably a well-intentioned physician, I don't know if that was at the ER or whatever, said, "Oh, he's paralyzed. He's never gonna walk again," or something like that to you, and
Yes.
what the actual reality was it's different. It's more complex than that. It's more flexible than that. There are a variety of different outcomes that can happen.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to just spend a bit of time with because, so yes, not only one physician, but, this is a teaching hospital in Minnesota where Mason was. And remember, Mason was 17 years old, and so he was not a legal adult at that time, and yet every time a new person rounded, and they were often, being taught how to be, right? A new person rounded and came in, they would say to him, "Now, you might not walk again." They didn't tell him he wasn't gonna walk again, I don't think, but they said, "You may not walk again," and this comes under dispute a lot. Even some of my friends have said, "Well, that's their duty," and I said, "Yes and no, it isn't," because when you're really in the spinal cord injury community, you realize that this is not true for a larger number of people than you would ever believe. Our dear friend had a high C injury. He walks. It's compromised, but so there are, and we have another friend, high C injury, ski accident. He skis now.
Yep, my grandpa had his back broken in World War II and could always walk.
Yes.
It's so fascinating because it's almost like I don't pretend to know what the motive is, but it seems like the thought is, "Hey, we gotta do tough love, prepare you psychologically for this thing," but kinda what you're saying is, actually what that psychologically does is prepares a person for depression, hopelessness, a sense of, like, having to grapple with a loss that may or may not be actually true. And does it help to go ahead and plan for this future that might not happen?
Right. And I think what's also really important to name about that is that obviously we're in an ableist society, and the perspective is often placed on walking. Walking is a small piece of this. We're talking about, and if you don't know this term, I'll break it down, neurogenic bladder and bowel. That means the bladder is paralyzed, the bowel is paralyzed. And often the sexual functioning is impaired or paralyzed. And in fact, that was one of the first things Mason said to me when he woke up. "Mom, will I ever be able to have kids?" And so, what people see and what they focus on because they themselves are able bodied is so far of a miss with all the other things that are happening in this person's new body. And so when those words were spoken so many times to Mason, there is a great deal of anger about that. And when he talks to healthcare providers now, he is an activist and he does a lot of work with the medical folks and community. He does say, please don't do this. Maybe the intention is good, but we don't know the outcome. We certainly don't know that a person will be paralyzed the day after. We've come to the bedside and aided a lot of families who that has not been true for. Again, they eventually move to really full mobility. So at any rate, those things were said and they create sort of that groove, right, in the brain. And it's silent, but it lived there for Mason for
Oh, I
a long
bet.
time.
And it's
Yeah.
not from a psychological perspective, if there are things that need to be dealt with, then the capacity to deal with them will be there when it's time to deal with them. If there are, changes, unwanted, new ways of having to exist, fine. But there's no need to negatively prep. the psychological response from that would actually create a physical response that is not conducive to optimal healing results.
Exactly right. And I think there's a lot to be said for the hospice model. The hospice model is what is happening with the patient right now.
Say more about that. That's cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe the origins of the hospice model were really to meet the person where they were in the moment, and that was the way that Craig Hospital worked. And so we don't need to come in at the bedside of whomever we are, caring for. A hospice person doesn't need to come in and say, "Well, this is probably going to happen. This is going to, their bodily function is going to shut down." And we don't need to do that. We need to tell the information when it is appropriate. And this is a 17-year-old boy at that time. And that was what he held on to. Now, the folks, when we arrived at Craig Hospital, talked to him about running. They talked to him about playing soccer. He was an amazing runner, and he's an amazing athlete now. It looks different. They talked to him about what he loved to do. They learned about what the essence of Mason was. And they never said, "You may never walk, you may never do this, they never said that. In fact, his physician, when he let him go, said, "Next time I see you, I expect that you may be standing upright in front of me."
Oh my gosh. I'm having such an emotional response to that because it feels so right and good. I wish everybody could get that.
Yes, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that might argue why, but really think about it. If it's your 17-year-old son, is that what you would like to have happen? I'm just
Absolutely.
saying.
Absolutely. Well, let's also look at outcomes. So I would imagine that research evidence as it's being done, there might already be some out there. I would imagine the outcomes would be much more successful with the route you're talking about versus the more pessimistic, more negative, more and also kind of like why do you want to prepare somebody emotionally for the thing they most likely don't wanna have happen? Why do you wanna do that? It just makes me wonder a little bit about is it to save the staff from having to deal with the emotions that will come out if there's a shock? I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, my only, I'm so glad I'd given up for the most often making stories about things, but I guess the way I've made sense of it is particularly on these newer medical students that we're rounding is they're wanting to exert their expertise, and quite frankly, what we know about how people navigated this injury alongside of us. I mean, again, Mason, star runner, star soccer player, it was devastating for many of his young friends and families, and people had a very hard time
Oh, yeah.
navigating that.
I had a brother die at 17 and in a car accident where a number of other teenagers were also had their lives irrevocably changed, and absolutely, the ripple effect I will still hear about it from people in that class that what it does because when you're a teenager, you live forever. Everything works out great. You kind of have that psychological sense of indestructibleness or something. And it's such a trauma and a wake up call to everybody who knows that kid. And I have no doubt that was devastating to Mason's whole community at that time and completely shocking. This happens to other people. This doesn't happen to us. This happens to older people. This doesn't happen to us.
Yes. Well, and Molly, thank you for sharing that here in this space
Oh,
about your brother and his friends. It's a beautiful and vulnerable example of the fact that we don't know what people are carrying. We really don't.
yeah. I don't want to take away from your story. I was just thinking
Yes,
of those kids
no,
because
it's
one of the
important.
kids in the car did end up breaking his back and had his life irrevocably changed. It's just thinking of I was busy at that time dealing with what my family and I were dealing with, and I was thinking that that other family had a whole different adventure that they went on and are still on to this day. Hey, my friends. I firmly believe that the common struggles we compassionate people face are often doorways, pointing us to the hidden beliefs that so many times keep us stuck. So if overgiving or people pleasing or guilt around boundaries has been holding you back, I created something to help. It's called the Boundaries Breakthrough Mini Course, and right now it's totally free. So if you feel the tug to grow in your boundaries journey, this is for you. You can start today at boundary.com/breakthrough. And if you're interested in coming to work with me more closely, the mini course is a wonderful way to dip your toe in the water, get some real help. And if you want to continue with me after that, then cool. I would love that. Boundary.com/breakthrough. It's really good stuff. Have fun.
So, what would be helpful? I think what I'd love to say first is what it is like to be a compassionate person, mother, caregiver, and partner navigating this. And part of the reason that I ended up coming to Molly is I'm still navigating all of this and creating boundaries that are both healthy and kind and respectful, honor self, honor others. And
Because it's
so it's a life's
complex.
work.
It is
Yes.
complex and it's ever changing. I love that about you, how what were healthy boundaries the first week versus the first year versus now 5 years later, those things shift and change because boundaries are things that are conducive to life. What is the most supportive to life right now? What is the most honoring thing for myself and for everybody else right now? It's different than it was in year 1.
Yes, it most definitely is because, again, back to paralyzed bladder and bowel, there was a whole toileting routine, and I was a caregiver in that process. We have a lot of really bad jokes if anyone ever wants to hear that. But, we as parents and Sydney, our daughter as well, we were caregivers in that, not so much the toileting piece, but walking and how to live life in a new body.
You're all learning it.
We're all learning it. Yeah.
Mason's experiencing it directly, but everybody very close is also experiencing it in this indirect but very significant life-changing way. Things you don't think about until you have to.
Yes. And so that is so different now than where we are when I have, we're 5 years out. We now have a man who is 22 years old who is running his own business, very successful entrepreneur, content creator, and
We
much
will put
more,
this in the show
activist.
notes, everybody,
Yes.
don't worry.
Yes. And so, having, and I'll just add here a couple of things, thinking about also Dr. Ingrid Clayton's work about fawning and Molly's work together. Holy moly, you're both such important healers in my life in this moment. But I grew up being taught very much so how to be an excellent fawner. And as an only child, a lot of what happened was often my fault. At least I was told that. And even in adulthood, when I was hospicing my father, he was dying of lung cancer, and my family was home and needed me. And I had been to Florida, I don't know how many times, 4 times, and I had been there on a particular stint for 3 weeks, something like that. I don't know, making these numbers up. And I said, "I'm gonna go home, Dad." And my father said, "No, you're not. Your job is to stay here with me. You are the only child, and you must stay here." Well, a social worker overheard that and said, "No, you must go home. I can see it. You have nothing left in here." And that person was 100% right. So carrying that fawning behavior forward of needing to be the one, I was the one when everything happened, I went into overdrive and, did 10 million things completely effectively, although I don't remember any of them, just to say.
We are amazing while we're, like, killing ourselves. We are amazing at it
Yes.
until we finally run out.
Yep, and even now to this day, Mason has really been, and my partner Donna has been a really important part of my healing journey too, because they will often beautifully, kindly name to me, "That's okay, we don't need you to take care of us. That's okay."
You don't?
I'll be like, "But wait, I could make your favorite meal. I could, get this rug for you," or whatever it is. And while I love doing for others, there is a point where I lost myself. And it was really clear to me that when Mason was injured, I really lost that thread of who I really am. I don't even know if I knew it before that.
Yeah, and that would bring it out so much if because it is so unconscious for so many of us, and then something like that happens, and you're like, "All right, this is who I am, this is what I do, full identity in this, goodbye. Goodbye, everything else."
Yeah, and that's absolutely what happened now that we're saying this out loud, is I shut everything off. I shut everything down, like my whole operating system. One thing I didn't shut down though was my connection with mind body medicine. And in fact, I ran a group in February. Mason was injured in January, ran the group in February for 8 weeks and held space for people. And that model is I'm both facilitator and I'm there practicing with everyone and participating. And I held space. I sobbed, ugly sobs, snot going everywhere. And I held space as a facilitator. And that group held every emotion that came up, not just from me, but from all others there. So I will never forget, and some of them are still friends, still in touch, never forget how I had that sacred space during this time.
You didn't know how perfectly it was set up looking back.
Yes.
It's so cool that model where the quote, quote, "healer," whatever a person's title they wanna use, gets to be a human. I love that when we get to be fellow human beings as practitioners.
And that was sort of the process. It was like, "What am I doing? I've gotta cancel this. Wait, this is about healing, and I have permission to heal in this space too." And I sure did, and that's how I operate, with all groups that I lead now is very community led. But, so I think though that there was a turning point where I think we had probably about a year or 2 where I would say we really memorialized Mason. Probably I think we put upon him in ways we didn't anticipate as a performative. He was so positive. There's very few moments where he was rageful and angry, which or very sad and depressed. Those occurred. But I think we were in an unhealthy pattern that was very boundaryless. And there came a time where I thought, all right, we're moving into a new reality now. And I'll also say that the dreams for me that I had been having, that it was just a nightmare, that this never happened. And then I would wake up in the morning in the hospital with him and see his wheelchair. Those dreams came to an end. My little brain was processing and I started to realize this is reality. And to say to myself, Stacy, what are you going to do to redefine your identity in light of this? And that was when I enrolled for the Awaken Coach Institute coaching course in Spain. I needed to go away. I needed a space to heal. I needed to be with myself.
Because there is a time where there's an emergency situation, unexpected emergency, highly significant, intense, urgent, whatever word you want to use, situation that does then dominate attention because it should, because it's big,
Yes.
something exploded. And so all hands on deck. It's not a one-day event, it's not a one-week event, it's gonna take more time. And I think especially when there are those situations that happen that are it's a long ride to get to the end of the part where it's emergency level, extreme level, serious and important. Death is one of those things as well. It's just gonna be a year or 2 almost before there's an allowance of attention to open back up. And what you described, it kind of fits within that time window a bit. And it is this huge question there for us psychologically. Okay, what now? Can I be more than this?
Right. What is possible now, given this new reality?
Yeah, this is what it is. This is what it is. It still can change and it does. But that's so true.
Yeah. And I think, again, Craig Hospital did this well. Toward the end of the stay, they start turning toward really what would be considered post traumatic growth, purpose, and meaning. What is it that you are going to be excited about that's going to give you energy? And that is, we all know this now. That's what propels us forward. That's what propels us to get up every day, most days, to do that work that we feel is important. Not everyone is feeling that way, of course, but I think after such events, there needs, like you said, there needs to be that emergent period. And also remembering that the body holds this, and a true trauma response, right, is what's going to happen next, even if maybe the worst thing has already happened. And so I think all of us, and my daughter and I have talked about this too, that we weren't that aware how hyper vigilant we all were.
100%. Totally get that. You don't even know it till the body lets you know it. So
Yep.
weird.
Yeah, and
So
you find
strange.
yourself snapping at one another, and getting ground in about your opinion and your idea because it's the best one. And so I think that everything that happened during that time was really natural. And I also will say that being a certified strengths coach was really helpful. And it was my my partner Don who brought up to me, wait a minute, don't you have responsibility? You don't even need to know the definition, the word says it all. I have responsibility too, and I think we're, like, in conflict trying to race to Mason's aid, and I thought, "Well, I'll be damned. You're right."
Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch.
But, that having some neutral language or some frameworks, I think, to help us navigate the chaos of what was going on both internally and as a family system, it was really valuable.
Because that's a really positive approach. Actually, the problem here is that we're both highly responsible people and we're conscientious and we care.
Yes.
And so we're
Yes.
just having a conflict here on the part where who's gonna do it.
Yes. Well, and as a compassionate person who is an overfunctioner, you bet I would beat him to it. It was like
And
a
I need
race.
to beat you. I need
I
to beat you
am.
because especially if I'm currently still finding my meaning and purpose in this emergency event instead of anything else.
Yes,
Oh, that's
absolutely.
so good.
So
Mm.
it is so good, and it's all driven by this most beautiful intent to love on your kid, to love on your family, really. But yeah, and so now we can laugh about it, and we do. There's a lot we laugh about, but I'll tell you, being in the throes of it was tricky. I also though want to say that like everything, we find ourselves with this both and language a lot. I think to describe both what's horrific, which is happening right now in Minnesota, for example, and also what is beautiful, and that the communities are coming together. Neighbors are looking after neighbors, and that's true of this situation too. What has emerged from it has been such beautiful and sacred time. And so for parents who have young people, and we're fortunate that Mason he is a verbal processor. He does like to share a lot with us, and that is a gift. And what I tell people when these types of situations happen is this is sacred time and it has been gifted to you.
Oh, that's a good perspective. It's gonna happen. What a beautiful way to see it and experience it. I was actually gonna ask you, what would you say to the person currently experiencing this or family members very close, compassionate person as a friend or family member experiencing a life-changing event? I mean, that changes everybody in its path, not
Right.
just the person physically experiencing it.
Yeah. Well, and I think from that framework again of being a healer, being a compassionate person, the very first thing, and I, as I indicated, Mason really put this out there, was I need help. I am not superwoman here. I need help. So all of us went to the therapist that was offered to our family when we were at Craig Hospital. And so first of all, accept help. And I mean, that's very hard because we feel too guilty. I can't tell you the number of families I've tried to talk into, and the number of mothers, compassionate people that I've tried to talk into creating a GoFundMe or asking the community for help or asking for grant money or whatever it might be. There's so much help out there. And it's challenging to find. Lucky to have two parents who are researching and finding it. But there's a lot of help and people want to do something. They want to be mobilized. And so that was the first and most important thing that's still a little bit hard for me now. The other piece I think that's important is as a mother, as someone close to Mason, who is the person living with this disability, with this paralysis, I don't know his perspective. I am so darn close to him. I love him to pieces. And I don't know what his life experience is. And I will never know. And so I leave him to tell his version of the story. This is a learning.
Boundaries.
And yeah, it's boundaries. And he reminds me, he's really good at boundaries, Molly. He reminds me when he doesn't need my help. And he reminds me how he'd like to be assisted. And that is to offer, can I support you? Which I would say to anyone. Can I support you? If so, what would be helpful here? Instead of running in and saying, hey, move aside, I'm going to do this, because that's how I was really operating. Like, get out of the way. Nobody can do this. I'm the mother here. I mean, I remember that. I can just feel it.
I think it's how we compassionate folks, not everybody, but especially those who are helper, fixer, giver types, especially those of us who run with that high level of responsibility, but nobody ever gave us their boundaries. It's actually the most likely way we are to violate other people's boundaries. We talk about that all the time in the boundaries program. It's because it's kind of shocking because we the last thing we'd ever want to do is violate somebody else's boundaries. We're horrified at that idea, and then yet to find out, oh crap, I'm all up in your business, telling you what your business should be and how and
Yes.
the most powerful thing I can do on a boundaries perspective is actually step back, get in my own space, and treat yours very respectfully, which sometimes will involve me helping you if you ask for it and if I want to. But the energy is so different when it's boundaried, isn't it? It's not
Yes.
that urgent, frantic, clutching, grasping energy of I have to, obligation, duty, fear. It's really love based. Feels different.
Yeah. I would say it's love based and it's also based in trust. My children have gone through a lot. They are amazing problem solvers. They've got it. And they'll ask for help. They know the tools, they have tools. I remember, I got in a huge fight with my parents a long time ago because they insisted that I move down to, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. I could not stay into, they were very boundaryless, no surprise, and shamed me for staying here in Duluth, Minnesota, because it was that, thrust upon kind of help that doesn't make anyone feel good. And it doesn't honor what they know and have as individuals in their own agency and way of being.
It's so true. It's so good. It's actually just good boundaries practice for every parent of every young adult is trust and honor someone's journey. And when you're in a situation like this, though, there's no room for error. You have to. You have to because it's so disrespectful not to.
Yes.
Would you mind? I'm not even sure how to ask this question, honestly, but I was thinking earlier you mentioned the word ableist. Some folks know what that is, and for other people, it's a new term that's not really well understood, especially if you don't have, a person living with a disability in your family. For compassionate people, we wanna respect everybody, but sometimes we don't know how. You have been a mama now of somebody who is living with a disability for the last 5 years. I'm imagining you know some things or have experienced some things that would be really valuable pieces of wisdom to share with the general community.
Well, and I think a non-shameful perspective, a way of looking at it is we're all wearing different pairs of glasses, right? I happen to be a white, you can't say middle age because I'm not going to live to whatever 130 or something. But I'm wearing a certain pair of glasses. I am an able-bodied individual, and the way that I see the world is very different from someone who may not have that same identity, right? And so the awareness of the fact that we're all living in this world quite differently. And sometimes there's a time for education. And again, should Mason always be the person doing that? Just like people of color, do they need to be teaching us about racism? We are all racist. We are ableist. This is what we carry in our DNA. And it's not, we're not bad people for this. but acknowledging that we don't actually, I think is the first thing, is that we have a different perspective is very important. And then recognizing the world isn't built for people who use wheelchairs, or, the world has been built according to able-bodied people. And so that means that, and Mason navigates this most of the time on his own. It just so happens we're going to a hotel this weekend. And so, yes, will I call ahead and make sure that we have an accessible room and just double check on that, because they sometimes don't even know what that means, an accessible room, like hearing accessible, and I have to really spell it out. Or, so there's an education that needs to be, I think, continuous. And I think we should not put that on the backs of people who are living with disabilities either.
We don't wanna assume you are my educator, so on top of everything else, you need to educate me
Yes.
is
Yeah,
disrespectful.
I need to educate myself so that I can show up more effectively, not just for people using wheelchairs, but for all people, and to understand that we're in this life living very differently than the person next to us, even if they look similarly.
I really like how you put that it's ever ongoing, because I think sometimes, especially as compassionate or conscientious people, we can get really perfectionistic and feel like we should know everything at all times already. And when in actuality, we have these multiple opportunities, especially as we walk forward in life and we meet different people and we come into contact with differences, that all those moments are opportunities to say, "Oh, I need to know more about this and what the experience of another human is like." And I can use this time, now that that curiosity's been activated in me, thanks to being in this different situation, I can now go ahead and take it upon myself and learn a bit more with that curious, open attitude of, "This is only going to make the world a better place. It's only gonna inform me more as a human, as a compassionate being." The fact that I don't know it yet doesn't mean anything at all. Just means I don't know it yet, and it's an opportunity for me to find out. How fun is that?
100%. Yeah, total different perspective shift, and how fun it can be to continue to grow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, Stacy, thank you so much for sharing your story, first of all, being so vulnerable and open. There's so many families who experience things like this, and you always feel so alone. I think it's so cool that you and your family show up at other events where something like this happens. You're showing up in the hospitals. I know my parents did that for quite some time when there was an accident that happened involving a death of a young person, because, man, you're so alone when it happens. You feel so alone. It's the last thing you expected, and you're in shock, and to know there's other people here and they made it through, it gives so much hope. I know this story is going to reach so many people and do that same thing, and or prepare them, those who have something coming ahead in the future, just to know it's not just possible, like what you said, that there's a sacredness and a beauty to it that might be very unexpected. But I want everybody to know, if you need a speaker, if you need a trainer, if you need a coach, how do they find you? And then also, love for you to share to the audience how to find Mason, who's amazing advocate for people with disability. I got to see when Stacy and I were in Maui together, I got to see some of what he's doing when you were showing me on your phone. And I'm like, what? Who is this kid?
Yeah.
What
Yep.
personality? Anyways,
Yes, I have amazing children, amazing
yeah.
children. And yeah, so my daughter, I'll just say too, little shout out, Sydney Samborski. She's a personal trainer. She's amazing. She's an award-winning bodybuilder.
Yeah, I saw her bodybuilding
Yep.
photos too. Holy shit.
Yep, my kids do what they mean to do.
It's
They
so
they
cool.
really go for it. So, and Mason Brandstrader, his last name is a little tricky. We'll get that to you, but he's also got a website, Mason Bran, Bran LLC, and you can follow him on all social media. I am Stacy Crawford. I own a company called Clearwater Coaching and Wellness, and thanks for all of your beautiful words around that. I do strengths based team facilitation and training and coaching, executive coaching. And then I also have a number of personal clients, and I do actually quite a bit of work with trauma, people who have experienced difficult transitions, And that is also strengths-based and goes even a little deeper than that too. And so I have a website. I am on some of the socials as well. And it's been such an honor to be here with you, Molly.
Have you guys all checked the show notes? Because it's Clearwater with a K, by the way, for the scientific
Yes,
symbol
thanks.
K. And yeah, Stacy, I'm sure we'll be talking again. And thank you so much for this gift of your time and your wisdom.
Thank you so much.
My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.